5 cents, one slice of watermelon, and a riot in Panama City that left more than 30 people dead or wounded. On April 15, 1856, a quarrel between an American traveler and a local fruit vendor exploded into gunfire, a mob attack on the Panama Railroad, and a diplomatic crisis between the United States and New Granada. Within months, American Marines would land on Panamanian soil. The incident became known as the Watermelon Riot. But the fruit itself was never really the story. To understand what happened, we need to understand Panama in the 1850s. At its narrowest point, the Panamanian Isthmus was only about 50 miles wide, separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Panama was then part of the Republic of New Granada, which would eventually become Colombia. And its geography made it incredibly valuable. In 1846, New Granada and the United States signed the Bidlack-Mallarino Treaty. Americans gained the right to cross the isthmus, while the United States promised to protect New Granada's sovereignty and keep the transit route open. Then came the California Gold Rush. After gold was discovered in 1849, hundreds of thousands of Americans headed west. Traveling around Cape Horn could take months. Panama offered a much faster alternative. American investors seized the opportunity. In 1855, the Panama Railroad opened, connecting Colon on the Atlantic coast with Panama City on the Pacific. For travelers, it was revolutionary. A journey across the isthmus that could once take days was reduced to roughly 4 hours. For many Panamanians, however, the railroad brought a very different kind of revolution. For generations, people had earned their living transporting travelers and goods across the isthmus, as muleteers, boatmen, porters, guides, and innkeepers. Now, a foreign-owned railroad was doing much of that work. Thousands of Panamanians saw their livelihoods disappear, while the economic benefits of the new transportation system flowed largely to foreign investors and travelers. By 1856, the resentment was still there. It was simply waiting for a spark. That spark arrived on the afternoon of April 15th. A train pulled into Panama City, carrying roughly 1,000 passengers bound for San Francisco. But the tide was too low for them to board the waiting steamship John L. Stevens. So the passengers wandered into La Cienega, a neighborhood near the railroad station, where freed slaves, laborers, artisans, immigrants, and street vendors lived and worked. Among the things being sold was watermelon. According to Panamanian accounts, an American traveler named Jack Oliver, nicknamed New York Jack, took a slice from a stall operated by Jose Manuel Luna. Then he refused to pay. Luna demanded his 5 cents. The argument became heated. According to Panamanian sources, Oliver insulted him and drew a revolver. Another American reportedly paid for the watermelon, perhaps ending the dispute. But a Peruvian bystander named Miguel Abraham became involved and, in the confusion, disarmed Oliver. A brawl broke out between Americans and local residents. Then someone fired a gun. Exactly who fired the first shot remains disputed. But the sound was enough. Word spread through La Cienega, and local residents poured into the streets. More Americans arrived from the station. Within minutes, a street argument had become a large-scale confrontation. Police and state authorities were slow to respond. Gunfire erupted. Machetes and improvised weapons were used. The Panama Railroad station and depot, the most visible symbol of American economic power in the city, was stormed and heavily damaged. Other American-associated buildings were attacked as well. When the violence finally ended, more than 30 people across both sides were dead or wounded. The exact figures remain disputed. Panamanian accounts record roughly 18 American casualties and around 15 Panamanian casualties, while American sources from the period give different numbers, often reporting substantially fewer Panamanian deaths. Even Jack Oliver's role is uncertain. Some accounts portray him as the man who began the confrontation. Others suggest he was a bystander, caught up in the violence. But there was no uncertainty about what happened next. The watermelon dispute had become an international crisis. The United States argued that New Granada had failed to fulfill its treaty obligations to protect American citizens and guarantee safe transit across the isthmus. American warships began appearing permanently off the Panamanian coast. Then, on September 19, 1856, the crisis escalated. 160 US Marines landed at Colon. It was the first American military intervention on Panamanian soil. Washington justified the landing as necessary to protect American citizens and prevent further disorder. But to many Panamanians, it looked very different. A foreign military force had arrived in their country, claiming the right to intervene under a treaty that was supposed to protect New Granada's sovereignty. And this would become a pattern. The Watermelon Riot helped establish a precedent for American intervention in Panama, justified by instability, treaty rights, or the protection of American interests. That pattern would echo for decades, eventually leading into the much larger story of Panama's separation from Colombia in 1903 and the creation of the American-controlled Panama Canal Zone. The immediate dispute took another 2 years to settle. In 1858, the United States and New Granada signed the Cas-Heran Treaty. New Granada accepted responsibility for failing to maintain order during the riot, and a claims commission was established. American citizens and companies eventually received substantial compensation. Historical estimates vary from roughly $160,000 to $500,000 depending on which claims are included. But there was no equivalent compensation for the Panamanian families who lost relatives, homes or livelihoods. The diplomatic dispute had been settled. The deeper grievance had not. And that is what makes the Watermelon Riot so much more than a strange historical curiosity. It is tempting to remember it as a riot over 5 cents of fruit. But the watermelon was only the spark. The kindling had been accumulating for years. A foreign-owned railroad had disrupted an established economy. Local workers had watched their livelihoods disappear. Foreign travelers were passing through Panama in enormous numbers, while much of the wealth generated by that traffic went elsewhere. And behind it all stood a treaty that promised protection and neutrality, but could also provide a justification for American military intervention. Then, one afternoon, somebody refused to pay for a slice of watermelon, and everything caught fire. The Watermelon Riot would remain part of Panama's historical memory as an early moment of resistance against a foreign presence that increasingly treated the isthmus as a strategic shortcut, rather than as the home of its own people. Decades later, the struggle over control of Panama's geography would become even more important. The Panama Canal would transform global trade. But long before the first ship passed through its locks, Panama had already learned what happened when powerful outsiders decided that its narrow strip of land was simply too valuable to leave alone. So perhaps the real question isn't why a riot happened over a watermelon, The real question is why 5 cents was enough to ignite it. Because history's smallest sparks can produce enormous fires, but only when the kindling has been piling up for years. And on that April afternoon in 1856, the kindling was ready. All it needed was a slice of watermelon.